tales are basically myths with English names. If we put the Latin names in them, and Greek names and Greek characters in them, they would be considered myths. When we take the Greek names and Latin names out of the myths, we call them fairy tales. So basically fairy tales are just myths with English names in them. So sometimes we lose the full depth of the meaning of them and what culture these fairy tales tie the child to. They tie them to a European frame of reference. Because fairy tales, or those people that present fairy tales, we call them griots in African culture. They broadcast the culture, help connect the child to the culture. The fairy tales provide the child a motivation to be in the belief system of the culture. Fairy tales provide the motivation for the child to accept the ceremonies and rituals of the culture. The fairy tales are the emotional motivators that help tie the child into the spiritual essence of the culture, as well as the social customs and orders. So when we embed these images and program African children with European fairy tales, we're programming them into the white way of thinking and into white culture, and then we wonder how and why we're losing them. Well, we have to look at the basis of the fairy tales, and a person that did that quite well was Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud, he used what we call myths, which are Greek and Latin fairy tales, to tie people into European culture. This is Freud right here, a rather devious character, but he used a fairy tale called Oedipus. He used that character to define the European mind. Oedipus tells a white person what's going on inside their head. He used fairy tales to define the mind of the European and basically made up their mind and how their mind works. It helps them to repeat life and helps them to repeat their destiny and purpose in life. This is Freud. He's the main perpetrator of this sort of way of thinking by using fairy tale characters that we call Oedipus. And we call this the Oedipus syndrome, and we call it id and ego, and all that comes out of European fairy tales. They use that to define their mind and to make up what they call the European mind. Another psychologist or person that helped to define the mind, which is used to create these fairy tales, is a person named Jung. Jung has helped to write the script of the person. The fairy tales provide the way the person acts and reacts in the culture, and also helps a person to map out their life purpose, their life script. And so by giving them a fairy tale, you help program them into a way of living and a way of thinking. And there's another person by the name of Dr. Spock who also used Freud, and Freud used the fairy tales. Spock used Freud. He studied under Freud's way of thinking, him and his wife, for 15 years, and they came up with how to raise a child. And everyone in this country followed that system all over the world, using the Freudian system of raising their children based on the myths or fairy tales of European culture. In other words, it teaches the child how to act and react and accept their culture. Now, as you can see right here with Pavlov ran experiments with a dog and found out that if you ring a bell and feed a dog, pretty soon you can just ring the bell and the dog will get hungry and have a response. So he taught the person how to program a dog with bells, and later on he used that on people. And this, of course, is the evil character, in which they believe is a demon inside of the mind of a child and a demon inside of the mind of a person. So we have the Pavlov theory as well as Sigmund Freud, who I call Sick Man Freud. So we can get that in our minds that we're actually following a sick psychology. Now, Freud related the baby to a penis. This is what goes on in these fairy tales as I go over them with you. The baby is a penis, the baby is money, money is a penis is a bowel movement is a baby. In other words, they believe that man gave birth to a woman. In other words, a rib, and a rib is a long symbolic form of a penis. So through man having a penis, he gave birth to a woman, gave birth to bowel movements, babies, and all that. Those are the mythological associations made in the fairy tale that is embedded in them when you tell it to an African child, which makes them highly dangerous. Sigmund Freud, Dr. Spock, they give us this kind of understanding that when a person gets hurt in a relationship, the reason why they stay in a relationship is because the person that hurt them is the only one that can solve this problem for them. That's why you find People commonly say, why is this lady still married to this man? He's no good, that sort of thing. That comes out of the embedding that's done in the fairy tales. Because they believe it hurts. It hurts you to be wounded, but it feels good to be healed by the person who hurt you. So therefore, psychologically, you stay in a relationship because the only way you can feel good is by having the person that hurt you to heal you. So we have to look at the way the mind is structured in the fairy tales. It gives you the foundation for this belief system. The brain absorbs data and it's called thinking. When you absorb information, they call it thinking. When the brain memorizes that information, we call it intelligence. They only use 40% of their brain. This is the belief of the Europeans. Let me raise this transparency up some more. Idea of the mind's function is created from fairy tales and myths called Oedipus, as I mentioned before. Anything based on a myth is a myth. So the foundation for the European mind is fairy tales, and there's also what we would call a lie. The Caucasian mind construct is not how their mind functions. They have created their mind, which is a fairy tale mind, but that is not how their mind actually functions. History reveals the actual function of the European mind. They are a predator species of people. They prey on other people's culture, music. They prey on other people's resources. And they're always at war. They have a military way of approaching food, people, religion, and science. They are military people, and they're always fighting. And their history reveals that that's how their mind is. It's always in conflict. Their brain creates conflicts with itself, conflict with nature, God, and Africans. They're always in conflict. And this kind of subliminal embedding is done by the fairy tales. Now, let us progress. I want to show you that you have to be in harmony with the child that you're raising. And we have to have this harmonious relationship. And this harmonious relationship is based on something totally different. Let's see if I can make that clear for you. See, comparison to African and European and the psychological development and the meter, how you measure the mind and growth and development, psychometric development, 9 hours old, being drawn up into a sitting position, able to prevent the head from falling backwards. An African child can do that, as I stated here, in 9 hours, where it takes a European child 6 weeks. 2 days old with head held firmly looking at the face of the examined. They can look you in the eyes, hold the head up erect. Within 2 days, it takes a European child 8 weeks. At 7 weeks old, they can support themselves in a sitting position while watching a reflection in a mirror. It takes a European child 5 months. As you can see, our growth and development is on another schedule, so we have to give another kind of rhythm, another kind of foundation to our child with these fairy tales. And actually, we're giving our child a retarded kind of way of approaching themselves, nature, and God by using these European fairy tales. Within 5 months old, they're holding herself upright. It takes a European child 6 months. Taking a round block out of its hold in the form of a board, it takes African child 5 months, European child 11 months. 5 months old, African child standing against a mirror. It takes a European child 9 months. There's more to it, but I just want you to briefly be aware that we have a different kind of rhythmicity, and this is done in our fairy tales that helps to establish the child's basis to be rhythmically connected to themselves. It's a certain rhythm that you use when you talk to children, and that rhythm is contained in African fairy tales. Now, according to the Jung and European and Sigmund Freud kind of perspective, evil is dark. As you can see, this dark creature here is preying on these white ladies. This dark demon here is preying on these white ladies. This is the shadows that's embedded in the picture. The conscious mind doesn't see, but the emotional mind sees it. This kind of embedding is done in the shadows of fairy tales. We call that masking, which is another word for hiding things. Now, I showed you the European mind. Let me show you the African mind in a constructive way. The African mind unifies the spirit, the mind, and the body to understand things. We put things together in a holistic picture to understand, whereas the Europeans, they fragment They divide to hold to understand. In other words, if I was trying to explain the vitamin C in an orange, I would say the ingredients in the orange, I say vitamin C, I say bioflavonoids, I say calcium, I say magnesium, I say zinc, I say all these nutrients, and you say, well, since I can break that down and fragment it, therefore I have a good understanding. Fragmentation means understanding to the Europeans. True and false are different in the African mind, but true and false are the same and correct in the European way of presenting things. Even in the fairy tales, as I go over them with you, they present true and false as one and the same. That's what the American Indians would call speaking with a forked tongue, or double talking. That means you're presenting a lie and the truth at the same time, and yet they accept